I never thought a simple garden bench could destroy an entire neighborhood. It started as a small gesture, a place for my late husband's memory, but within days, the HOA labeled it a violation and demanded I remove it. Then came the fines, the letters, the whispered complaints, and just when I thought it couldn't get worse, they did something that crossed every line of human decency. By the time it was over, half the community had turned against them, and the other half learned what happens when you push a grieving woman too far, because sometimes the quietest homeowners fight back the hardest. When Ellen moved into Cedar Ridge Estates, she believed she'd finally found peace. After losing her husband the year before, she wanted somewhere quiet, a place where her teenage daughter could finish school, where the air smelled of pine and freshly cut lawns, and where everyone waved as they passed by. At first, it was exactly that. The houses were lined with perfect symmetry, mailboxes all painted the same dull beige, flower beds bursting with identical marigolds. It felt safe, predictable even. The kind of place where neighbors borrowed sugar and gossiped about whose grass was a shade too long. The HOA called it community pride. Ellen called it control. Still, she kept to herself. She paid her dues on time, trimmed her hedges, and followed every rule, every line item in that thick binder they called the covenant. It wasn't worth upsetting anyone? Not yet. Her corner lot sat at the edge of a cul-de-sac where sunlight hit the yard just right in the late afternoon. That's where she planted her small garden, roses mostly, her husband's favorite, and at the center of it she left a little space just big enough for a wooden bench. Not fancy, just simple. Weathered oak, smooth from years of being in their old backyard. It was more than furniture. It was memory. For weeks, no one said a thing. Neighbors passed by and smiled. A few even stopped to admire it. But then, one morning, an envelope appeared on her door, crisp white, stamped with the HOA's seal. Inside, a letter. Unapproved structure, immediate removal required. That was the first time Ellen realized peace in Cedar Ridge wasn't something you found. It was something the HOA allowed, and they could take it away in an instant. And from that day forward, nothing in that perfect little neighborhood ever felt peaceful again. At first, Ellen thought the letter was a mistake. The HOA sent dozens of notices every month. Trash cans left out too long, porch lights the wrong wattage, weeds daring to grow between sidewalk cracks. She figured someone had misfiled a complaint and she'd just call to clear it up. But when she dialed the number listed at the bottom, the voice on the other end wasn't interested in listening. "This is an unapproved structure," the woman said flatly. "You'll need to submit a design request for review." "It's just a bench," Ellen replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Unapproved structure," the woman repeated. "It's in violation of Section 4B. Ellen hung up with a shaking hand, staring out the window at that small patch of peace in her yard. The bench looked harmless, gentle even, surrounded by pink roses just starting to bloom. But in the eyes of the HOA, it was now something else, evidence of non-compliance. 2 days later, a man in a golf cart circled her house. He wore a neon vest and carried a clipboard, stopping at the edge of her lawn to take pictures. She watched him from behind the curtain. Click, click, click. Every sound felt like an accusation. That night, another letter appeared. This one, a violation notice. $50. Payable immediately, Ellen paid it. Not because she agreed, but because she didn't have the strength to fight. She told herself it wasn't worth the stress. But deep down, a tiny ember of anger started to glow. Weeks passed, and the letters didn't stop. They found new reasons. The paint on her mailbox was slightly off. Shade? Her trash bin was visible from the street. Her daughter's car, parked on the curb overnight, was unauthorized street. Parking, each violation came with a fine, and each fine came with a threat. Failure to comply could result in legal action. Ellen began to feel watched. When she walked her dog, neighbors' conversations stopped. When she mowed the lawn, the same man with the clipboard would appear, pretending to inspect something across the street. It wasn't long before people started whispering. The HOA president, a woman named Patricia Monroe, had lived there for 20 years. She was the kind of neighbor who took pictures of other people's lawns for the record. Her house looked like a showroom, every flower in place, every shutter aligned. Patricia believed rules were what kept people like Ellen from ruining neighborhoods. Ellen learned that the bench had become a topic at the last HOA board meeting. Patricia reportedly said it invited noncompliance. Ellen couldn't understand how a piece of wood and memory could offend anyone so deeply. But to Patricia, it was never about the bench. It was about control. When Ellen ignored the latest removal demand, the fines jumped to $100, then $200, then $500. The letters became colder, more aggressive. They warned that continued defiance would lead to lien placement on the property. That's when fear began to creep in. Ellen's husband had always handled finances. She'd never dealt with legal threats before. The idea of losing her home, the place she'd rebuilt her life, over a bench felt unreal. Her daughter suggested removing it. "Mom, it's not worth it," she said quietly. But Ellen just shook her head. "It's the last thing of your father's that's still here." The next week, Ellen came home from work to find the bench gone. The roses were trampled. A single stake sat where it had been, holding a laminated note. "Unauthorized structure removed by order of the HOA board." Ellen dropped to her knees. The grass smelled like soil and gasoline. Her husband's bench, the one he built the summer before he died, was gone, without warning, without consent. She called the HOA office again, voice trembling. Patricia answered this time. "We warned you," Patricia said. "You refused to comply." "It was mine," Ellen said. "You had no right to read your covenants. It was on community property, but that was a lie." Ellen knew exactly where the property line fell. She'd measured it herself before planting those roses. The bench had been on her land. That night she barely slept. Something in her shifted. A breaking point. Quiet, but irreversible. The next morning, Ellen drove to the county clerk's office. She requested the plat maps, the official property records, the HOA bylaws, everything she could find. And there it was, in black and white. The bench had never violated anything. In fact, the HOA's own boundaries ended several feet short of where her garden began. Armed with proof, Ellen sent a letter demanding reimbursement for the destroyed property and formal apologies from the HOA board. She attached copies of the records, highlighted in yellow. She even gave them 7 days to respond. They didn't. Instead, they fined her again for garden maintenance issues. The roses she'd replanted were now exceeding height limits. It was petty. It was deliberate. And everyone in the neighborhood could see it. People began talking. At the mailbox cluster, in the Facebook group, at the pool. Some said Ellen was being dramatic. Others quietly told her they'd had similar experiences. Fences repainted without notice, holiday lights fined, even a swing set dismantled for being the wrong color. A pattern was emerging. Patricia ruled the HOA like a private kingdom, using fines as punishment and intimidation as policy. Ellen decided to fight back the only way she could, publicly. She filed a small claims case for property destruction and harassment. The news spread fast. The same neighbors who once avoided her began stopping by to offer stories, copies of their own violation letters, and quiet encouragement. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Patricia insisted Ellen was trying to undermine community standards. Flyers appeared around the neighborhood urging residents to vote for stronger rule enforcement. The tension thickened. Driveways became battle lines. Neighbors picked sides. On the morning of the hearing, Ellen stood outside the county courthouse, clutching photos of her garden, the property map, and her late husband's handwriting etched into the bench's underside. For L, my peace. Patricia arrived moments later, flanked by 2 HOA board members in pressed suits. They didn't look at Ellen. They didn't have to. The courthouse hall felt colder than it should have. The judge called the case, and for the first time, Patricia had to explain, under oath, why the HOA had removed personal property without written notice, without a hearing, and without confirming ownership boundaries. As Patricia spoke, her confidence began to crack. The judge asked pointed questions. The paperwork Ellen had gathered painted a clear picture the HOA had overstepped, repeatedly. But before the verdict could be read, something unexpected happened. A local reporter, tipped off by another resident, published the story online. Within hours, it spread across social media. HOA destroys widow's memorial garden. Cedar Ridge was suddenly on display for the entire town, and not in the way Patricia liked. Neighbors who had stayed silent started to turn. Some demanded a recall vote. Others stopped paying dues. The HOA board's email inbox overflowed with angry messages. Patricia called an emergency session, trying to contain the damage. But by then, the narrative had already escaped her control. Ellen didn't know yet how far it would go. She didn't know that this one story, her small act of defiance, would unravel years of unchecked power inside Cedar Ridge.